Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. What our goal is today is actually to do two things. One is to give you a overview of what is happening in the AI space with respect to data analytics, specifically because the AI word is a heavily loaded word and means lots of different things. So as it relates to analytics, we are going to talk about today what is real, what is available today, what is safe to try, and what's still futures. And then we're going to go right into actually showing you ClearStory's approach to the machine-driven AI-based approach to analytics and go into a couple of examples in a live demo. So with that, first thing I'd like to point out is that often a lot of companies will ask us, how mature is AI for analytics? And the answer to that is, and this is actually data from Gartner Research, is that 60% of organizations are going to adopt some form of AI-powered analytics by the end of 2018. Those particular areas that are being adopted right now and are increasingly going to be adopted through this year and next, we're going to talk about in more detail today. The number one driver, however, for AI is its proven ability to add real material value to the business through, of course, business insights. And at the end goal of all AI is to really make sure that the user or consumer of the output of AI is actually able to appreciate and see a lot of additional value than what they were seeing traditionally in any traditional solution they were using. And if you look back around 5-7 years, it was actually a little hard to apply AI well to data analytics, because in order for AI to actually give you good answers on data analytics, you need a lot of data. But in the 5-7 years that have gone by, all companies are now amassing more data. They are getting more organized with their data infrastructures. Some are, of course, are putting data lakes in place. But wherever your data may be stored, the main point is that you have to be at the root of it a data-driven company with a lot of data across your different repositories before you can really leverage the real benefits of AI, since, of course, it needs a lot of data to work on. The other big point I want to make here is there's been a lot of confusion in the market on what the difference is between AI and machine learning. And they are actually two distinct things, and we often find that customers interchange those words very loosely, which really is a little dangerous because they're very distinct. So AI specifically is about a machine automatically carrying out a task. And it could be a routine task that you do when it comes to accessing your data, analyzing your data, blending your data. It could be a non-routine task, which could be more advanced discovery of data. But it is about a machine carrying out a task that otherwise a human was doing. But the key point here is that when the machine carries out that task, there's an output, and there's an immediate output. And that output has to be delivered through a very intuitive user interface so that the user or the human can interact with that output and send a signal back to the machine, and it's a back and forth continuously for the real power of AI to be appreciated. The difference between that and machine learning, which is something quite different, is for machine learning, it's about giving machines a lot of data and letting the machine learn the data over time. And for it to work well, you need a large volume of data. And the ML processing can continue to work in the background on all the data and then deliver an output when something is found. And the output is typically based on what is learned. And if what is learned is of interest, it is outputted, but it's not necessarily a continuous back and forth at every moment with the end user. So ML is actually just one application of AI. There are many different applications of AI, but the key point is that ML requires a learning model, and that learning model may have an interesting output or may not have an interesting output, but when it does, it'll show it to you, versus AI is a constant back and forth from a machine-driven task to a human signal. I wanted to first give you two examples of popular AI applications in data analytics, and some of you on the line may know about these, but banks are now using AI to interpret transactional data, and specifically they're doing it to be able to communicate back and forth with the customer to deliver a very personalized customer service experience. And in this example here, which you see from MasterCard in their application, is a user really literally through a text-based user interface can say, how much did I spend on Uber in September? And the system comes back and says, you spent $343 between these dates, and should I break that down for you? And the user says, no, I'm not interested in September anymore. Show it to me for October. So it goes ahead and analyzes the data for October and returns an answer. This is what I mean by a machine doing the task of finding the data in the source data, analyzing the transactions, and returning an output. And that output is what the user then communicates back and forth with in order to actually arrive at the answer that they're most interested in. The net of this particular AI application is the user interface is a chatbot, and behind this is a system that is actually literally doing queries on transactional data to get you these answers. Another example of AI and data analytics, and a very well-known one, is Airbnb's use of AI for dynamic pricing. So if you have a home or anything you're renting on Airbnb, in this case the super home patio that you see on top of the screen, what it looks like is every person that has actually rented it in the past, how much they paid, and what are the factors were going on that caused them to accept that pricing and book the room. And in this case, you can see that there were seasonality factors, day of the week factors, events going on in the area. And based on that, it is going to recalculate what you should be, what is the best price and what users would be willing to pay for it. This literally is analytics on pricing data, but again, through a user interface that is going to tell the user exactly what it is that they should price the room at for that particular day or week. When you look at Gartner's definition for AI, they take it further than what we just talked about, which is that the ultimate vision for AI is that AI ultimately will continue to learn what the user is signaling back to the machine. So the machine first does the task of automating how the data is analyzed. The user interface gives a signal back, and that signal back gets learned. And over time, using that signal, you're then only presented with what you're most interested in. So for instance, if you never want to know about your Uber transaction and it's always your restaurant transaction, and that's how you interface with the mobile app, it's going to learn that. It's going to then always give you your restaurant information first and get right down to what you want in a very, very personalized user experience. The net of it is for the user to be wowed by the output of the machine and the interface and the user experience back and forth, and Gartner simply calls that a surprise, meaning that the machine was smart enough to do a task, to then learn your behavior on the output, and eventually zero in on the things that you care most about. And in their simple words, they call that a surprise. And that's where ultimately all of this is, the innovation is still continuing to happen. Now, to get down to how is AI used in data analytics today, and what is prevalent, and why is there so much adoption going on right now? And like I said, 60% of companies adopting it literally this year. The net goal of their adoption of machine-driven data analytics and AI technologies is to improve the business value from data. So to deliver more material, more critical insights to the business stakeholders faster. And there are a couple of different areas of in data analytics where it's very well proven. The first is natural language processing, where you can basically take the output of the analytics, process what that output is in terms of the actual metrics or KPIs or the insights, and present that back to the user in natural language layman terms that a business user can relate to. The second application that is very prevalent today is using a machine-driven approach for high-scale processing of complex data for the purpose of accurate results. So when data is very complex, where it's got high dimensionality or a lot of volume, or you're blending many sources of data together, what tends to happen is if you're doing it the manual way or even a workflow-based approach, the result is that people who are actually wiring up data models or trying to prep the data, etc., can only look at so much data or only so many dimensions, and a result of that could be some inaccuracies in what the insight is depicting. Versus if you put a machine to it, it can go through all the data, all the dimensions, and find exactly pattern match to make sure that we get down to very accurate results. So accuracy on high volumes of data and complex data is the other reason it's being used. The other common area where it's being applied is to take the whole process of traditional data modeling, which involved bringing data together through experts who know how to join data, etc., but rather applying a machine-based approach to it so it's completely automated. And the machine is doing the task of actually identifying how to model the data and is returning a response to the user through a very intuitive user experience. And the human gets to signal back if they want to move forward with what the machine is recommending. And that is an example of what you're going to see today. The other area where it's used in a big way is transformation of data. So looking at the source of data, which might be very complex, and determining how to transform the data through a machine-based approach versus requiring the old way of doing it where you relied on the data expert to understand what is in every dimension of data and how to actually go about transforming it. And finally, the end result of this is if you combine using AI across all these different areas, what it gives you as an end result is you're able to actually harness a lot of complex data very fast for very material business insights. And you evolve from the descriptive KPI batch-based reporting that has been common in traditional analytics and traditional BI to completely interactive storytelling where the system is doing the tasks for you and the human is actually signaling back through it through an intuitive user interface. And they're able to actually get to the insights much faster and get a more agile way to actually discover what's in the data, dig out the insights, and get to answers quicker. So the goal ultimately, you would never think about using an AI-based solution if you're going to do batch-based KPI reports, because why have a machine work constantly on your behalf in the background if everything is going to be batch delivered? Where you want to use it is where you want to deliver a different experience around continuous intelligence or continuous interactive insights. So what does this mean as it relates to ClearStory? So ClearStory data is focused entirely on business analytics on complex data. And in particular, there are a couple, the end goal for every customer that uses ClearStory is to be able to access very complex data across disparate sources, be able to infer what's in the data, in other words, interpret what is in the data from these sources using a machine-based approach and remove a lot of the traditional human effort that was required to do that, to then actually take that data and allow the user to, say, blend source A with B with C, and do that in an automated way through algorithms that are built under the hood in our system. And by doing so, actually remove the heavy traditional data modeling that was required in traditional analytics and BI. And the end goal is to generate a holistic insight very quickly and speed the ability for the business to get the answers that they need out of the complex disparate sources. So it's really taking what was 70% done in terms of data prep and data transformation and data blending that was typically done in traditional IT expert-driven type of ways, to applying a machine to it to do all those tasks and then interface and delivering the output of that through a very intuitive UI to the user, who can then journey through it and journey through through the answers and get to the insights very quickly, and we're going to show you that example. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through this very quickly. So in order to enable this, there are two parts of ClearStory that you're going to see today. The first part is how we use our machine-based approach to understand what is in the data, so interpret the data, help transform the data through a machine-based approach, enable what we call data discovery, which is looking at every single value across every dimension and understanding how all those values correlate with each other and its relevancy to the insights. And then most critically, then allowing you to simply point and click and blend very complex disparate sources together through what we call data harmonization. Here you see some examples of that, and you're going to see it live, but here's a screen you're about to see that actually shows you how data is discovered through a machine-based approach and how you can interact with it and understand what the patterns are between all the data in these different dimensions. And what you see here is the automated blending of the data. And in our case, the UI and the signal that we give back to the user is through what we call a harmonization score. And Matt here is going to describe that in more detail. But like I said, every machine-based approach, every AI-based approach needs to have a very intuitive user interface to present the answers back and the information back to the user. And in the ClearStory way, the way it's done is through the scoring of all data, which presents a very intuitive UI for the user to interact with. When it comes to uncovering insights, again, it's about interpreting what it is the user is interested in and auto-discovery of insights. There are three things you're going to see today, which is how you explore data in an agile way at the insights level to discover what's of relevance to the user, narrating basically the observation and keeping everything in context. I won't spend too much time in the screen here because Matt is going to show it to you live, but the goal here, one thing I want to point out is in any visualization that's outputted from the system and presented as a business insight, anything you click on here is not a traditional scripted drill down. It's actually going to find every related insight to what you clicked on in order to be able to get right to the answer that the business is interested in. Alongside that is a narrated audit trail of what is found at every point in time, and it gives you the ability to keep all the context and maintain all the observations even as data continues to update. So you never have to drop into email and lose context on what someone saw last week versus what is being observed today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, but I want to keep four things in mind here as you see the demo. The four most well-proven areas of AI-powered analytics is data interpretation, so interpreting what's in the data, all the data types, all the values, for the sake of transforming data with a machine versus manual effort. Making sure that you score all data so that you can identify relationships between the attributes. The purpose of this is to automate the whole process of data blending and making sure that when you're clicking through visualizations, the system is actually discovering what is most relevant to that particular point in time and presenting that back to the user. So no insights are ever lost or ever or hidden. And then finally, the natural language presentation of findings. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt so you can see some of the slides.
Great, thank you, Sharmila. So perhaps we'll pause here and take a quick look. I don't think I see any questions right now, so we'll go ahead and switch over to the demo. Okay, so what I've brought you in to here within ClearStory is called our storyboard premise. And this is the user interface for any business user. So this might be an executive, someone in the marketing team, sales team, but a very intuitive interface for pretty much anyone in the organization. And what you'll see, similar to dashboards from other companies, very visual presentation, and we'll dive into some of the capabilities and what makes us different and automated for the average user. So here we could dive into specific frames within our storyboard and start looking into some of the trends and what's going on in the business. So here you see our top 10 items and how they're performing. We can continue through kind of in a presentation type mode and take a look at how the business is doing. We can also here at the top add on a filter. So I might specifically want to focus on the sales in the East or the performance in the East. So here I could turn this filter on, and now I can see specifically how the Eastern region parts of the business are. And you'll see over here, as mentioned, about the in-context collaboration. So as we look at these comments, we can click on it and see what Sharmila had looked at that point in time, get her context, and answer further questions. In addition to those comments, we also have the capability of alerting. So we could create an alert here, and you'll see here for the East region, we've got approximately $12 million in sales. We might want to specifically alert for when our sales reach $13 million. So we could put in 13 million and save that alert. So what will happen now is, as this data refreshes every day, every week, depending on how you're processing your data, each time the system will continue to check for that scenario, and when it's reached, would publish an email to you letting you know that, hey, that alert that you've asked for $13 million in sales has been reached. And you'd get a link directly back to this frame in the context of the data as it looked at the point it crossed that $13 million threshold, so you could then dive into the business. Perhaps a note out to your team congratulating them on reaching that threshold, etc. So those alerts are there as well. The next important capability here is to be able to really ask that next question and find that next insight. And so in this case, we could click on our chart, on our pie chart in this case, and you'll see Columbus had sales on the order of $2 million. But we might want to understand further what's driving that business in Columbus. And so when we click on Explore Insights, here ClearStory is generating this dynamic list of insights, this dynamic list of places you might answer that next question. And so the question in my mind might be, what products are driving that business? But another user may come in and want to understand what stores or divisions are driving the business. And both of those options are here. So you're not just driving up or down a traditional hierarchy. You haven't had a developer who's had to manually create the relationship between this visualization and other visualizations. In this case, ClearStory is understanding everything that's in your data, in the data sets that are used within this storyboard, and it's automatically connecting you to other insights within the system. And so in this case, I might want to look at the breakdown of the sales by commodity or by product. So I could dive into the product view and start to see that, oh my goodness, in Columbus, the vast majority of the business is in bread, with a little bit more in rolls and sweet goods. And I might want to further understand, okay, so with regard to my bread business, again, when I explore insights, now I get a different dynamically generated list of insights, places I could go to find that, to answer that next question. So here I might want to dive into each division and how it's trending over the last 2 years. And so I can see the bread performance over the last 2 years. And so that continuous, you can continue then from there to dive back into commodities or go back to the main storyboard and focus on one specific division in this case. So that very dynamic and continuous interaction with the machine to understand how your business is performing and how you can improve performance going forward. So having taken you through our business experience, our general business user experience, and their capabilities, I'm now going to dive into what we call our story experience. So now we're looking at where your analytic team is bringing data together within the system. They're bringing those disparate data sources together to publish out, to build out those insights for broader consumption, or perhaps just for their analytic need within the organization. So here within stories, you'll see that you've got different capabilities than you had within the storyboard interface. So you now can actually create different types of charts. You can manage their orientation and how they are handled. You can change sorting and all the things you would expect an analyst to be able to do within a analytic tool like this. And once you've come to a place where you've answered perhaps the question on which state has the most sales here, but now the question is, okay, that's great, but I have another question, and for that question I need more data. And so what you'll see up here in the UI is the ability to add more data to harmonize. And when we click on this, this brings back a list of all the data sets that you as a user have governed access to within ClearStory. So this is any data set that a data steward or someone else has shared access with you. And each data set within the environment has been scored on a basis of 0 to 10 on how well it matches up, how well it overlaps, how well it relates to the data set that's currently in your story. And so for that sales data set, you'll see that there are a number of different additional data sets that match up well with it. And you'll see over on the right, we give you an indication. Is it categorical data? So it's hierarchies, attributes, things like that. Or is it locational data? Or is it time-based data? And you'll see visually that for each one, you get an idea of how it overlaps. And then you can actually hover over the score itself and get a quick view of what those key matches are within those data sets. And one thing you'll notice here is that in this case, the field names are different, right? So we're not looking at the field names. We're not looking at the column names. We're looking at the data in those columns to determine the overlap, to determine that they have commonality and similar patterns within the environment. And so you could continue through the list, or you could certainly use our search functionality. In this case, I might want to add some syndicated data from a syndicated provider to get a view of in-store activity of my sales. And so in this case, I can see that there's attribute overlap. And when I hover, I see a scan code that's in use for the syndicated data and a UPC in my sales data. So I'm going to go ahead and select that syndicated data set and click apply to bring it in.
And what the machine here is doing is it's actually doing the data modeling for you. So I just wanted to point that out. It's doing it automatically and you don't have to do anything manually.
Right, and what you'll see here is at the top, we've got this new data model. We've got the point of sale data, the sales data, combined with the syndicated automatically. And if we click on our data discovery button, you actually see that the system has brought together these two data sets, joining on UPC and scan code. And then you actually have full control to go in and change the type of harmonization as you like. So in addition to the system modeling everything for you, you still have control to go in and add to what the machine has put together or update it. And so now we could go ahead and start to add some information from our new data set. So perhaps I want to go in and understand how many stores are selling. So I understand what my total sales are, but can I actually get an idea of how many stores are selling a given product nationally? And so I then might want to go through and look at specifically UPCs. And so again, very interactively, the user can go in and look at scan codes. They can add to the sales amount. They can add a new measure for store selling. And we can focus on the ones that have the most stores selling. But seldom is there just one data set you want to bring together. And so very quickly, you could go in and add a third, and again, dynamically, quickly bring this in. And in this case, there's always great discussion around how many stores, but there's always more discussion around how much money I'm making. And so we go in and add some margin information. So you see here, we've got some SAP margins. And again, they're going to harmonize on, they happen to have a SKU descriptor. So we can go in and harmonize the SAP margin data. And again, now we have a third component of our data model in terms of the SAP margins. And again, the system has automatically brought that together for us. And so now we could go ahead and add another measure, and I'm going to call this my gross margin because that's what it is. And we will go ahead and add the amount times. So now I can go across my data sets. I'm going to grab that margin that I just brought in from the third data set. So now I've got a calculation going across them. So I can now see my margin, and perhaps, that really needs to be my focus. So I might want to grab those highest margin items and look at those. And so I can very quickly interact, very quickly bring more data sets together. And at this point, I probably want to go ahead and let my team know. So similar to the storyboard environment where we had collaboration and the ability to add in-context comments, here I can do the same. So now I can let the team know I have brought together the sales margin and syndicated data for our top SKU analysis. And I can go ahead and post that. And a key piece here is that each of the users who I've shared this story with will get an email letting them know that I've brought that together. And they may use that for a diving point where they might dive into even more detail on specific SKUs or specific stores and understanding more about how the business is performing.
Matt, can I slip in an attendee question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so someone asked, how many data sources are people typically bringing in?
Sure. So we have customers often bringing in 15 or 20 different data sources. For one of the key components, and you'll see it here on the screen, is in addition to the visualization capability and the storyboard use, data stewards have this ability to create what we call a derived data set. And that becomes critical when we're bringing together that many sources. So those data stewards can come in and they can bring together the 10 or 15 or 20 sources and publish a derived data set. And this, in essence, looks exactly like any other data set from the end user perspective. But once the data steward has brought it together, it makes it a lot more straightforward for an average business user to use it. So this we could call our POS with syndicated and margin. And then that data set would be available for us to go and share with any of our users. And so here you actually see how our data sets are set up. And it'll have these key attributes around the scan code and the amounts. And we could go ahead and share that with the broader organization. And the broader team doesn't need to know necessarily that there's 2 or 3 or 5 or more data sets behind that. Were there any other questions, Alexia, that needed to be answered?
Yeah. So one was, who is ClearStory data for?
So ClearStory data is really for your business user. We focus on analysts who can bring the data together themselves through this very intuitive interface. Obviously, we have a range of customers across all industries who are using it. Some who are doing a lot on the back end in terms of bringing the data together and leveraging harmonization and collaboration. And then others who have a high investment in the storyboards and hundreds of users accessing storyboards to understand and run their business.
Okay, so it's, to clarify, it's for companies with complex, disparate data.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's jump in. The one thing I did want to, let's come back to questions in just a minute. I just wanted to kind of wrap up with the last component, right? So we started at storyboards. We dropped into stories and brought some things together. There was a couple of last components I wanted to make sure we cover. So the first was publish a storyboard. And this, I just want to make sure it's clear how simple it is to then, once you've done that analysis, to publish it back out into that interface we looked at with to start with. So here's that sales performance analysis storyboard we started with. So we can go ahead and add this new visualization to that storyboard. And as you saw earlier, here's our top SKUs and our map view. As we scroll down, we've got all the other views that were there, and now we've got this brand new, just exported this morning, view that has by UPC, sales and stores and margin. And so as simple as that, you've kind of gone from the storyboard view all the way through. The other component I wanted to talk to, I apologize, from here, when we looked at these data sets all brought together, we have within the data discovery where you set up the relationships and the system brings together the data sets for you. We also have a data discovery view that was in one of the screenshots earlier. And this is key because a lot of times the average business user or your business users don't always understand completely maybe the data set they're working with, but certainly the relationships between the data sets. And so here you see for each of our categorical or attribute data, you've got an idea of how much of the data is populated, the extent of it, and then which categorical components are used most often within the data set. And you can see that here visually as you work through. You can get an idea of each of the fields and each of the attributes. But as you scroll down and you start getting into the measures in these data sets, we can actually see correlations and relationships between the data. So in this case, we've got number of stores selling highlighted, and you can see relationships with year ago and retails and so on. And as you click on different measures within the data set, you automatically get updated relationships to all the other measures within these three combined data sets. So now if I select sales quantity, you'll see a significant relationship to the sales amount and the relationships with all the other measures in these three data sets. So it's a key component because, again, the machine is helping you understand better those relationships without a lot of advanced analytics by the user. So those were the last two pieces I wanted to touch on. Were there any other questions that we had from the call?
I think we're a little bit short on time, so we can do the rest of the calls, the rest of the questions offline, and we'll follow up with everyone individually. So let's go back.
So one final thing before we wrap up here. What you saw today is, what we didn't show you today is how we actually do the interpretation and the transformation of the data, but that is easily tried with ClearStory. See how we score all data for relevancy to each other down to every dimension and looking through every value so that the process of data blending is actually now all machine driven. And what happens underneath is a dynamic data model is created with a couple of clicks versus the high effort that's usually involved in bringing all the complex data together. And then finally, on the Explore Insights that you saw on the visualizations, is finding the answers that the business user is looking for, whether by just clicking on any element in the visualization without necessarily having any of that pre-wired into that viz itself. So it's looking for all possible answers across every other story and storyboard and every visualization. The best way to really appreciate what the machine is doing is that, of course, we'll get to this in a second, but one thing I do want to point out is the things to watch out for when using any machine-driven technology is, make sure you're aware of your data quality. When it comes to business logic or business algorithms that need to be added for your insights, don't let the system own business rules and logic. Make sure that you are inserting, don't default to what the system may generate. Make sure you are inserting your own custom algorithms. Make sure the user interface is very intuitive and can be narrated. And finally, and the most important, is test it and ensure that it scales to large volumes of data and high data complexity. Because the true value of a machine-based approach is to make sure that it actually works at scale. The final thing before we wrap up here is like anything today, like any product, the best way to really appreciate the value of a machine-driven approach, AI, and the whole experience is to try it. So we highly encourage trying it on your own data. So the way you can do that with ClearStory, if you want to speed up your insights from your sources and you want to get that whole experience end-to-end, is there are 3 ways to do it. You can go to our website and request a custom demo. You can also ask to get a data preview on your own data, which means that it's your data that you're working with ClearStory, and that is at no charge. You can go ahead and do a preview. And the last part of it is, as part of that preview process, once you're working with your data, you get a quick training on how to use it and you get hands-on. Every organization that has used ClearStory has been quite amazed with the results, the speed, the value of the machine-based approach. So we highly recommend, popping into our website and requesting one of these options so you can get hands-on.
All right, with that, thanks again, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We have a few more in-depth questions left that we will follow up individually to make sure those get answered. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact us. You can go to our website and you'll find us there. And thanks again.